The city that will host the 67th Eurovision Song Contest in 2023 is... Liverpool.
It's now been a year since thousands of Scottish Eurofans had their dreams crushed as Liverpool was announced as the host city of Eurovision 2023. Given the unique circumstances of this year's hosting, it is perhaps unsurprising that we celebrate this anniversary having known next year's host city for months. However, announcing Malmö might not be the only thing Swedish broadcaster SVT are keen to get out of the way quickly, as it's been announced that they plan to shorten the grand finals runtime by about an hour. This announcement divided the fandom. You can't scroll through the wee Instagram feed without some quirky meme about the fans having their precious Eurovision ripped from them by the stingy Swedish television execs. But is the fandom overreacting? Yes, of course they are. This is Eurovision fans we're talking about. To be frank, I think this change was a long time coming. The contest length has long been a running joke.
When we reach the end of the show in approximately 3 to 8 hours...
I always wondered if the News at 10 team resented Eurovision for making them stay up so late once a year. But while the show has always been a multi-hour affair, it spent the last decade slowly creeping up further in length. This year's final was the longest yet, clocking in at just under 4.25 hours. Yup. Longer than the infamously drawn-out editions in Vienna, Tel Aviv and Turin. With that in mind, it is probably no shock that Sweden wants to rein things in a bit, especially given how they ran things the last 2 times they hosted. In 2013, the Malmö contest followed 4 massive, extravagant shows in Oslo, Moscow, Baku and Dusseldorf. So SVT scaled things down to keep costs low and keep the contest sustainable long term. Then the Danes went bankrupt converting a shipyard into an arena a year later, but that's besides the point. 2 years later in Vienna, the show severely overran and came dangerously close to breaking the 4-hour mark, with way too many opening acts and a particularly slow voting sequence killing the pace. When Sweden took the reins again in 2016, they changed things up to make for a more engaging show. The voting sequence was completely revamped, speeding through the jury points reveal and saving the televotes for an exciting sequence right at the very end. Then they cut down the usually lengthy intro into a quick countdown straight into the flag parade. I know some weren't a fan of this, but I loved it. Listen, I'm sick of starting each final with a drawn out VT about unity, scenery and random circles. This sequence uniquely captured the arena's energy and was dripping in confidence. The contest was in the hands of people who knew what they were doing and had nothing to prove. Let's start the show. And what a show it was, because if there's one thing they didn't cut down, it was the interval. The time between the last song ending and Jon Ola Sand saying "Take It Away" jumped from about 34 minutes in 2013 to roughly 52 in 2016. Of course, SVT filled in that time with more interval acts, but the 2016 halftime show was also consistently entertaining, with even supposed Villa being killer. And there lies the problem with the last few contests. They've taken the bones of the Stockholm show and stretched them out to their absolute limits. This year's flag parade involved multiple guest performers and followed a 6-minute opener from reigning champs Kalush Orchestra. Each country's spokesperson gave a lengthy speech about peace and love, dragging out the voting, and then there's the interval. Look, I am so proud of the BBC's work on this year's contest, but that does not mean I am willing to sit through all of it again. Acts like the Liverpool Songbook were spectacular, but then you have stuff like a mini Graham Norton show interview with Gian Leeming, clip shows of various voting moments and successful past entries, and 3 voting recaps. That's only fair, right? You've got to air something while the commercial channels go to an ad break. I mean, what did Stockholm air during that space? It can't have been that interesting. It was Love, Love, Peace, Peace. That's right, the most memorable interval act in the last decade was technically ad filler. Okay, I can sort of see why they'd be wary of commercial broadcasters missing out on highlights, but I don't know, I just thought it was funny. Anyway, when you look back at the 2013 contest, you may notice that lines closed fairly early in the interval. compared to recent contests where they tended to close towards the end. That's because the organisers used that time to check and verify the public votes. But since 2016, when they split the voting into jury and televote, they've achieved that task during the jury voting sequence. This has led to them being able to open lines for longer, nearly an hour in recent shows. But if they wanted to return that time to what it was in 2013 and then jump straight into the jury votes, that will already cut around 40 minutes of the runtime. I don't think it's likely that SVT will choose to cut that much out of the show, but they can still use some of this approach to help trim the fat. But here's the thing, the extended interval acts don't even tell the full story of why the show is ballooning in length. The songs themselves are also taking far longer to get through, with big elaborate stage props like Lewin's Panini Press and Sam Ryder's fold-up spacecraft getting both more complex and more frequently used. The poor stagehands have their work cut out getting each song set up within the space of a postcard. So to compensate, the postcards this year were a full 10 seconds longer than they used to be, which still wasn't enough for some songs. The BBC had to add extra mini breaks between some songs on top of the existing ad breaks, completely killing the show's flow. I'm not even sure how they could fix this without causing fights to break out at the delegation meeting, and finding where the line should be drawn will be a tricky and contentious decision to make. Besides, introducing strict restrictions on staging could feel somewhat hypocritical after Sweden won the contest with staging that took nearly 5 minutes to set up, even after scaling back their initial plans. So let's add it all up. Liverpool's show, as stated before, clocked in at about 4 hours and 14 minutes. Stockholm 2016 was 3 hours 48 minutes, and Malmö's last outing was 3 hours 26. That is a big difference, especially compared to 2016, which followed the same basic format as this year's contest. For a more specific breakdown, I'd recommend checking out at High Windows 88 on that one site we don't talk about. He has a fantastic thread comparing the runtime of the 2016 and 2023 contests, and it was a big help in making this video, pointing out things I hadn't even realised, like the extra length of this year's postcards. Looking at his thread, it's clear that while a shorter contest is more than possible, and they can make big cuts if they wanted, the biggest difference will likely come from smaller trims and changes throughout the show. One example is the voting recap. 2016 had 2 recaps, one about 8.5 minutes long and one at 4.5 minutes. 2023 had 3 recaps, but the main one was shorter at 6.5 minutes. Cutting the number of recaps back to 2, but still keeping them shorter like in 2023 will save time even compared to the 2016 contest. Then add on other cuts, such as less downtime between songs, a snappier voting sequence, a less drawn out open, and the general efficiency that comes from Sweden's experienced production team. I think Sweden's ambitious goals are more than achievable, and they'll probably affect the enjoyment of the show far less than most fans expect. Besides, it's Sweden. Their last 2 times hosting gave us dancing meatballs and a sketch where Eurovision literally replaces God. I trust their team to give us a good show.